Hello, in this video we will be looking at Gettier cases and responses to Gettier cases in the form of reliabilism and virtue epistemology. And all of this takes place in relation to whether or not JTB, or justified true belief, is a necessary and sufficient condition for knowledge, or whether it is necessary but insufficient. So, before we get started, let's just remind ourselves of that standard definition. All right? The standard idea is that justified true belief is believed to be both necessary and sufficient for knowledge, and in that sense it is believed to provide a definition of knowledge. Okay? But there are already some reasons to believe that this may not be the case. It may not provide a satisfactory definition for knowledge. Okay, so in the previous video I looked at a case study, the example of the Greek mathematician Ptolemy providing mathematical justification for the generally accepted belief of the time, which was that the Earth was at the centre of the universe. Okay, so they had observations and they had mathematics and they believed their beliefs about the universe were true. In essence, they had justified true belief. But of course it turned out to be the case that this wasn't quite right. All right? In fact, it was completely wrong. So while they believed they had knowledge, it turned out that they didn't have knowledge. Okay, so this seems to throw at least some doubt on the idea that JTB is both necessary and sufficient for knowledge. Gettier takes a rather different approach to this, but with the same kind of aim, to show that the definition is not good enough. All right? And all Gettier cases have the same structure. All right? They portray situations in which we have justified true belief but not knowledge, by demonstrating that our true belief is only accidental in relation to the justification, all right, or the evidence. In other words, justified true belief is a necessary but insufficient condition for knowledge, and therefore you cannot think of it as a definition of knowledge. Now, Gettier gave his first examples in a very famous paper that was published in 1963, and we'll have a look at one of these examples now and follow it up with a couple of others that Gettier did not develop, but that make his point well nonetheless. So this is his example. Smith and Jones have applied for a certain job. Smith has strong evidence for the belief that Jones is the man who will get the job, and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Smith's evidence for this belief might be that the president of the company assured him that Jones would, in the end, be selected, and that he, Smith, had counted the coins in Jones's pocket 10 minutes ago. As such, Smith believes that the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. However, unknown to Smith, he himself, not Jones, will get the job, and also unknown to Smith, he himself has 10 coins in his pocket. He'd not counted his own change. Thus, Smith believes that the person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. He inferred this from the belief that Jones had been promised the job and had 10 coins in his pocket. Smith is justified in believing this to be true, but it is equally clear that Smith does not know that it is true, because while Smith does not know how many coins are in his pocket, it is in fact 10, he bases his belief on account of the coins in Jones's pocket, whom he falsely believes to be the man who will get the job. Thus, Smith has justified true belief, but it is not knowledge, since the justification for his belief is not the reason why the belief is true. So you can see that Smith is right, but just by accident. Okay, because here's a second example. Suppose I wake up in the night and want to know what time it is. I always leave my watch on my bedside table before I go to sleep, thus my belief that it is there is justified when I wake up in the night and reach for it. While I was asleep, however, a thief crept into my room and knocked the watch from my bedside table. However, he replaces it in the exact position it was before. After the thief has gone, I wake up and want to know the time. I look at my watch on the bedside table, which I had believed correctly to be there because I put it there before going to bed. Thus, I have justification for why the watch is there, and my belief that it is there is true. But the justification is actually incorrect for the reason as to why the watch is there. So the problem can be summarised. Right? Although the belief about the whereabouts of my watch is true, and justified Gettier claims, so the problem can be summarised in this way. Although the belief about the whereabouts of my watch is true and justified, Gettier claims that it does not amount to knowledge. I have all the evidence I usually have, and my watch is where I believe it is. But in this case, because the thief knocks the watch and replaces it, and I'm unaware of this, I am still relying on the same evidence as I do in other cases when I have woken and reached for my watch. But the reason in this case that my watch is there is not because I put it there. Thus, my belief is true only by accident, and knowledge is not something one believes accidentally. Right? The justification has to be the right justification for the claim, and in this case it's not. I've just got lucky. Okay? So Gettier claims that this does not amount to knowledge because the connections between the reasons I have my belief, its justification, and the belief being true is too accidental. So what Gettier cases show is that for knowledge, we need to connect the belief and its justification to the truth of the proposition believed. And this is not the case in relation to the watch example, neither is it the case in relation to Smith and Jones. There are a number of responses to Gettier, all right, the first of which is the no false lemmas response. Now, this is a little bit of technical language, but a lemma is a claim made somewhere partway through an argument, okay? And so in the cases of the Gettier cases that we're looking at, if I take the watch example, we can say that I put the watch on my bed, on my bedside table, is something that happens partway through this idea. So, and since I have actually inferred the belief that my watch is on the bedside table from a form of justification that is not actually linked to the reason why it is there, right? This is a false lemma, right? Because it is not the case that the watch is there because I put it there, okay? So this is a claim partway through an argument which is false, so it's a false lemma, and I'm inferring a belief that happens to be true from this false lemma. So the idea is, if your argument does not contain a false lemma, then your belief will be knowledge because the justification will be correct, and therefore the inference that you take from that justification can be then counted as justified true belief and knowledge. All right? But obviously in the case of the watch that's not so. Okay? There is a false lemma in there, namely the idea that the justification is the reason the watch is on the bedside table is because I put it there. That's not the case. It was because the thief put it there. Okay? So that's the no false lemmas position in a nutshell. Okay? You need this condition that there can be no false lemmas within your justification, because then you're not inferring from anything false. All right? But obviously in the Gettier cases, I cannot know that my inference is based on anything false. So how do I know if I'm in a Gettier case or not? So it seems that whilst the false lemmas idea is quite a good response to Gettier, it is conditional upon actually knowing that one of the lemmas within the argument is false. And of course in a Gettier case, I don't know that. I didn't know that the burglar had knocked off the watch and replaced it on the bedside table. So I think that I am right in my justification. All right? And so that leaves a problem still to be solved. Let's now move on to another kind of response. All right? That of reliabilism. Now, the term reliabilism actually gives us a clue as to what this theory is all about. Okay? The reliabilist theory claims a belief is justified if it is produced by a reliable process, for example, one that produces a high percentage of true beliefs. All right. What makes this process reliable is a causal connection between the proposition, the claim, and the belief that that claim is true. All right. So the connection between P and the belief that P. For example, it is the redness of the poster that causes me to believe that it's red. The process has to be reliable. In this case, my perceptions are fairly reliable. So my perceptions must produce a high percentage of true beliefs in order for me to take the idea that the poster is red is actually a reliable belief based on the evidence. Okay, so what we can now do, according to the reliabilist at least, is to redefine JTB as JTB plus R. In other words, knowledge can be defined as justified true belief that has been gained through a reliable process. In other words, you know that P, if P is justified, you believe P to be true, and your belief is brought about by a reliable cognitive process. All right. Now, a reliable cognitive process is one that produces a high percentage of true beliefs, and it can be perception, memory, testimony, authoritative source such as an encyclopedia, for example. That said, appealing to reliable authority such as encyclopedias can carry its own problems. I'm sure you've heard of the appeal to authority fallacy, the idea that you believe something just because somebody happens to be an expert in it, and of course that means they're not always going to be right. All right, you shouldn't just appeal to authority. You should appeal to authority and then perhaps try to find out something about what has been said for yourself as well, just to confirm it. All right, so there is an issue there for reliabilism in terms of appeal to authority, but there are some other problems that we'll look at now as well. So in order to do that, I'm going to tell you the sad story of Gale the goose. It's my own example. Gale the goose was hatched on a farm and was among a number of other geese that lived there. Every day, along with other geese, Gale receives food and a friendly visit from the farmer. Gale thinks this is a great life, getting food every day. But then, Christmas Eve arrives. Now, through inductive reasoning, Gale believes that she will be fed every day. All right? After all, much of what we do relies on induction, that it can count as a reliable process, and Gale has a reliable memory and reliable perceptions. Gale can therefore justify her belief that I will get fed tomorrow. Moreover, her belief is not justified by anything false. Okay? The problem is that Gale does not know that she is on a farm that supplies the local butcher for Christmas. So you can see the problem. Now, just as an aside, I'm sure you do know about what induction and the problem of induction is, but I will just explain it briefly here. The method of inductive reasoning is to take a whole series of observations that are the same, all right, and from those observations infer a general principle. So in this particular case, because Gale has been fed every day for the last few months, Gale then thinks, well, that'll be the same tomorrow, because Gale has a whole series of examples that tell her the same thing. So she thinks she is justified in forming the general principle that I will be fed every day at this particular time. All right? The problem with inductive reasoning is that it just takes one counterexample for your general principle to be shown to be false. In this case, it was the one counterexample of Christmas Eve, right? And the fact that Gale was going to be served up as a nice goose on some dining table somewhere. All right. So there is this problem here in terms of the problem of induction, but it is at the same time, induction is generally speaking a reliable process. I mean, pretty much all of the sciences use it. All right. So this does show that there is a problem with reliabilism. All right. You can still have a false belief coming from a reliable process. All right. In this case, inductive reasoning. Okay. So that seems to show that either you must have false knowledge, right, which doesn't sound very good, or it's the case that JTB plus R is not a good definition of knowledge. In other words, it might be necessary, but not sufficient for knowledge. A more standard objection, but based on the same idea, is Henry in Barn County. Now, this is the one that's all over the specification. Okay. Now, Henry in Barn County. Henry believes there's a barn, the proposition there's a barn, when looking at the only real barn in a countryside full of barn facades or fake barns. But he also believes there's a barn, as I say, when he's looking at fake barns. But Henry, unfortunately, cannot tell the difference between real barns and fake barns. Henry's belief is caused by a reliable process, his perception, and an understanding that farmers do not generally put up fake barns all over the place. All right? So, when looking at the one genuine barn in Barn County, Henry is right, but he's only right by good luck. And similarly, when he's looking at fake barns, he's only wrong by bad luck. Now, as I've said, reliabilists define knowledge as JTBR, right? But this can also be argued to be necessary and insufficient, as it does allow for a claim to count as knowledge when the claim is false. Now, reliabilists reply that to have knowledge, I must be able to use the reliable process to discriminate between real and alternative possibilities. But here again we have a problem, because how do we know that our discrimination itself will not fall foul of the same problem? Okay? We might believe that we have real and alternative possibilities, but have got that wrong. Okay, we'll now move on to virtue epistemology. Virtue epistemology is essentially just another form of reliabilism, but with some important developments. We'll be looking at two versions here, that developed by Linda Zagzebski and the other one developed by Ernest Souza, and they're very, very similar. But first, let's just look at how Zagzebski replies to Gettier cases. Zagzebski argues that because Henry is either right or wrong purely by luck, right, and the same thing could be said in relation to my alarm clock example, even cases in which the belief is correct cannot count as knowledge. Now, the reason that the JTB plus R condition fails is because basically what's happened is that we've taken the JTB model of knowledge, the definition of knowledge, and just added on something, in this case reliabilism. Right? Now, there's no actual logical link there in terms of the add-on. We've just decided that what we'll do is define knowledge as JTB and then just add this extra condition to try and plug some of the holes that were evident with JTB. Right? But because there's no actual logical link, there's no way that we can guarantee that we will then logically exclude exceptional cases. Right? It's just that reliabilism in this case is just an add-on that it was hoped might provide a definition that was both necessary and sufficient. Right? But because it's just an add-on, right, because there's no actual logical link between the R part of the definition and JTB, there is no guarantee of logically excluding exceptional cases. So we can't, therefore, ever exclude other cases that are similar to kind of Henry's barn door or the alarm clock and so on. So Zagzebski's position is that any attempt to define knowledge in this way is doomed to failure. So, Zagzebski develops virtue epistemology, all right? But she doesn't really want it to be seen as an extra condition that you tack on to JTB. Right? She's looking at it in its own right. Right? Now, like moral virtues such as compassion and courage, Zagzebski believes there are epistemic virtues, and these include things like thoroughness, patience, impartiality, attentiveness to detail, and so on. Right? And these characteristics need to go with getting it right. In other words, with getting the justification for your particular belief right. So claims must correspond reliably with the truth, and the virtues must be understood as playing a fundamental role in establishing truth. All right. So one of the reasons, for example, that thoroughness is important is because if you're thorough in terms of your research and your justification, you are much more likely to get the right result. Similarly, if you're patient and you don't skim over things, okay, you are much more likely to get things right than if you just run quickly over something. If you're impartial, in other words, if you're open to several viewpoints and are willing to assess them in a balanced fashion rather than having a preference to begin with, okay, again, it is more likely that you will reach a true belief. Attentiveness to detail, again, that one seems obvious. Okay, so these epistemic virtues, as Zebski calls them, or character traits, are fundamental in the likelihood of us acquiring knowledge. Okay, so we understand that thoroughness, patience, attentiveness to detail are virtues because of the results that they achieve. Now, this differs a little bit from Ernest Sosa's virtue epistemology. Sosa says, you know that P, if P is true, you believe that P, and your belief is the result of exercising intellectual virtues. Now, like Zagzebski, virtue is not a matter of luck, okay? It relies on certain characteristics. For Zagzebski, they were things like patience, thoroughness, attentiveness to detail, and so on. All right? For Sosa, this is slightly different. All right? Knowledge has to be a cognitive achievement that results from the application of intellectual virtues. But what he thinks of as intellectual virtues are slightly different. All right? So he thinks that you need to be accurate, right? So P needs to be true, right? And you need to be adroit, right? That means that you need to believe that P, and the true belief that you have has to be the result of exercising intellectual virtues, right? Aptness is important. It's not a matter of luck that you get things right. Okay? So P is true. It's not a matter of luck. Just as in virtue ethics, one good act does not make a virtuous person. So believing something that is true through luck does not make you knowledgeable, right? So your belief, adroitness, needs to be related to accuracy. It needs to be related to the fact that what you believe is not a matter of luck. All right? And the whole aptness thing means that the agent's knowledge is the result of these two things. All right? So you've got this slightly different way of looking at it. So here are some questions. Now I would advise that you actually try to answer these in written form. Describe in your own words a Gettier case and explain why it suggests that knowledge is not justified true belief. Explain and illustrate the advantages of reliabilism. So in that case, you might, for example, think that because Gettier type cases are so strict, reliabilism allows you a degree of flexibility, but obviously, this obviously isn't in the question, but obviously that flexibility does come at some cost. All right. If you want to go on and explain the disadvantages of reliabilism, obviously it does leave open the possibility that you might get things wrong. Right? And then summarise in what ways virtue epistemology differs from basic reliabilism. And that's the end of this video.